Hello and welcome to the first session of Rule-Governed Games in Analytic and Continental Traditions by Longo. I'll read now the description of the seminar and then Longo's bio. The analogy between language and the game of chess appears for the first time in the two initiators of the linguist turn, Ferdinand de Saussure and Ludwig Wittgenstein, who propose it independently. However, the father of structuralism and the father of analytic philosophy express quite different views on the similarity of language and chess. In this class, we will address the divergence of the Continental and Analytic from the standpoint of the recurrent comparison between rule-governed games and the linguistic activity through which a collectively shared reality is constructed. Following Saussure, structuralists like Levi Strauss see the metaphor of the game in the structure of the myth, and Althusser consider a game as a structure that determines social roles within a system of oppositions. From this standpoint, individuals are like the pieces in the game of chess, socially constructed identities, the behavior of which is ruled according to the combinatory order of signifiers. While criticizing this static conception of the game, post-structuralists like Derrida and Deleuze tried to speculatively assess the metaphysical conditions for the event. That is the uncaused change of the structure that entails the actualization of a new organization and of a new distribution of social rules. Accordingly, they oppose the free play, the creative activity of the philosopher and the artist, to the ordinary activity of the individuals who interact according to the norms of the social game. See Derrida's structure, sign and play, or Deleuze's ideal game in logic of sense. Following Wittgenstein, analytic philosophers consider human agents as rational players rather than signifiers receiving an identity within the general structure of the discourse, who are engaged in performing linguistic moves according to the rules that determine how to displace the pieces, words, to get collective benefits. See David Deleuze theory of conventions, Sellers, some reflections on language game, and Brandon's games of giving and asking for reasons. Here, individuals are strategic players who learn the rules of the game by playing while taking part in a competition, the goal of which is to select the best possible strategies, moves, or inferences to obtain the desired outcomes. Rather than embodying given roles, agents here strive to improve the collective strategies, rule behaviors, with respect to the progressive grasp of the structure of reality. As a consequence, rules for decision-making can be modified as far as they are proven to be more satisfactory with respect to the establishment of collectively rewarding modes of interaction. Longo obtained her PhD in aesthetics philosophy at University Paris I. She is a member of the Collège International de Philosophie, Paris. She has taught at the University Panthéon-Sorbonne and Collart, Los Angeles, and is an instructor at the New Center for Research and Practice. Her research crosses several fields, such as metaphysics, epistemology, and aesthetics. She has been the author and editor of several books, such as Le Paradoxe de la Finitude, La Genèse du Transcendental, Breaking the Spell, Speculative Realism Under Discussion, Time Without Becoming, and Divenire de la Conoscenza Estética e Contingência della Reale. Longo, please take it away.
Thank you very much. Welcome, everybody. So I have to tell you that I got a temperature, so I'm doing this anyway. I can do this. I'm just maybe a little bit slow in reasoning, but okay, so be patient. First thing, it's about the structure of our seminar. So we have 4 sections. So the first three sections are today, next Saturday, and the follow. So until I think, I don't remember, it's kind of beginning of April, kind of 9th of April. And then we have a gap, and we have the last section, the 7th of May. So I decided to have all the students' presentations on the last day, so on May the 7th. Because so you will have the time to really prepare your presentations, and that will be group presentations. So I send you a link because I made a document for you about this. It's a shared document, and I show you by sharing my screen. Should appear. Okay, so this is a document that you can edit. You can access it with the link that I gave you. And it's for the presentation. So there are group presentations. So you are supposed to be 12. I think you are a little bit less today. Anyway, I thought to have 4 groups of 3. And any group will have to compare the games in 2 different authors. So the first group will work on the text. So it's all about the text that I uploaded. I don't know if you got them. The text that I uploaded on Google. So it's the first group will compare the text by Saussure, so the extracts from Saussure and the extracts from Wittgenstein. I can also give you the whole books because they are short books, kind of 150 pages each. So I can upload the whole books. The second group will compare Derrida and Levi Strauss, so the 2 texts that you have in the reading list. The third group, David Lewis and Brandon. And the last one will be a comparison between Deleuze and Sellers. So there are two texts by Deleuze. I mean the text from The Logic of Sense. So what you can do just during this class is to put your name under the topic that you like, that you prefer. So we will plan for the presentations. So you can edit the document. You just put your name where you want, just 3 people for any group. Okay, so we are doing this, that's great. Okay. And so this is for the presentation. That will be May the 7th. So all the presentations, so we will have the time to really talk about them, discuss, and taking the time to talk about it. And then you will have to produce a short essay. And I mean, it's more free. I propose you to make the same kind of exercise, so to compare 2 or more authors. work on 2 or 3 texts from the list. Then if you have other ideas or other proposals for your essay, we can talk about them. So we can discuss if you want to write something else related to the topic of the class. And you will have to submit this final essay 2 weeks after the end of the seminar. But we can talk about this later. This is just general instructions. So maybe I can ask you next week, what are you thinking for your final essay? Okay. So do you have any question about this, for this general structure? Okay. Okay, so let's start. So I'm going to share my screen. I'm trying to go through the text. Share. Okay, so we try to enter a little bit this problem of games. So I'm starting with language games in Ludwig Wittgenstein in philosophical investigations. Then I'm briefly introduce von Neumann and Morgenstern game theory and economic behavior. And then we will pass to structuralism, so Ferdinand de Saussure and Claude Levi Strauss. So the idea is to try to get the different conception about games in analytic and continental tradition. So you will see that they are, for some aspects they are similar, but for other aspects they are really, really incompatible. So it's a different way of conceiving games, even though there are some similarities. So I think that the main similarity is to overcome metaphysics and to overcome the idea that language is related to reality or to objects. So there is no unnecessary link between language and things. Okay, so this is the problem that opens Wittgenstein philosophical investigations. So this text starts with a passage from St. Augustine, the Confessions, and here St. Augustine explains how he learned language, and explain, okay, I learned language because people told me the names of objects, like words that really related to objects. And this is the traditional way of conceiving language, like language is as a kind of picture of things. And every word has a meaning, and this meaning is correlated with the word. And so the idea for Wittgenstein is to come back to this picture, and to do this, he developed this method which is called language games. So the basic idea is to show that names in language, or linguistic units, or just names, have a function which can be understood within language. So I just selected few passages from philosophical investigations. So the first meaningful comparison is is this. Think of a tool in a toolbox. There is a hammer, pliers, a saw, a screwdriver, a rule, a glue pot, glue, nails, and screw. And the functions of words are as diverse as the functions of these objects. So this is the first very meaningful comparison. So words are like tools, or like tools which are defined by their function. And then to imagine a language means to imagine a form of life. So there is this connection, which is really important in Wittgenstein, between a language and a form of life. And this is very important because it means that the functions in language are related to habits or way of life, or way of interacting. So we will explain this better later. So the idea is that any form of life can be considered like a language game. So any language game and any form of life are in some way correlated. So the first thing for Wittgenstein is to define what is a language game. So language game is a kind of method to explain his conception of language. And at the beginning of the investigation, he tries to define what a language game is. And he says, okay, the term language game is meant to bring into prominence the fact that the speaking of language is part of an activity of a form of life. Which means that in a form of life, we have some rules for coordination that we, in a form of life, there is a reciprocity and rules that allow for coordination. So it gives some example of language games, like giving orders and obey them, describing the appearance of an object, constructing an object from a description. So there are different activities, and all these activities are language games. That is to say, an assessment definition can be variously interpreted in every case. So if we go back to the problem at the beginning, so the idea that we have the problem in St. Augustine quote, Wittgenstein's definition can be variously interpreted in every case. That means that if we point to something to explain the meaning of a word, this kind of pointing to something depends on the language game. So for example, I can point to an apple to explain what an apple is, but also what is to the color. So for example, if I meaning what is red, I can point to an apple which is red, or to explain what is rotten, or to explain many different things, I can point to the same object. So an offensive definition is ambiguous, and it loses its ambiguity because this ostensive definition belongs to a specific language game. So here we have the first example of a game of chess. So the first comparison. So you say, okay, one shows someone the king in the chess and say, this is the king. this does not tell him the use of his piece unless he already knows the rule of the game up to this last point, the shape of the king. So the shape of a chessman corresponds here to the sound of the shape of a word. What is important here is that a piece on the chess, in the game of chess, is like a word for Wittgenstein. So the meaning of a word is the function of a word in the same way as the meaning of a chessman is his function in the game. But we can understand the function of a piece only within the context of the rules of the game. So when we point to the king, for example, or to a chessman, we can do this kind of definition. So we can define, we can provide this ostensive definition only if we are already in the context of the game. And the other examples are to say the same thing, which is that this ostensive definition, so to point to the king in the chess to explain the meaning, can work only if we already know the rules of a game, or we have some idea of a game. So one can also imagine someone having learned the game without ever learning or formulating the rules, but he may have learned quite simple board games first by watching and have progressed to more and more complicated one. It too might be given the explanation, this is the king, for instance. It was being shown the chessman of a shape it was not used to. So the shapes can change, but the function is the same. But to get the function, one has to know at least the concept of game. And the explanation, again, only tells him the use of the piece. And to understand the use of the piece, one has to have the concept of the game more generally. So the place is already prepared in some way. So this is a further case. I'm explaining chess to someone, and I begin by pointing to a chessman and saying, this is the king, it can move like this and so on. In this case, we shall say the word, this is the king, a definition only if the learner already knows what a piece in a game is. That is, if he has already played other games or has watched other people playing and understood a similar thing. So only someone who already knows how to do something with it can significantly ask a name. So if we have an idea of the function, we can ask the name for the function. But to know the function means to have at least an idea of a game where there are different functions which are available. A move in chess does not consist simply moving a piece in such and such a way on the board, but in the circumstances that we call playing a game of chess, solving a chess problem, and so on. So the move depends, so the validity of a move depends on the game. So in language, we have different language games, and a move in language depends on the circumstances of the language game. So the meaning of a word is its use in language. And this, in the same way as the meaning of a chessman is its use in the game. And the meaning of a name is sometimes explained by pointing to its bearer, but it doesn't mean that there is a necessary correlation between the name and the bearer. So then he tried to explain this concept of language game. And he says that if there is a family resemblance, that means that all the games are different. So there are different rules, different pieces, different goals. So it's impossible to provide a general definition of what is a game. So he says there is this family resemblance, and this family resemblance finally concern the use of the word language game. So what Wittgenstein is doing is to provide examples of language games in order to explain the function of the word language game. So language game is a word which has a function in its own language game, which is a language game in which we have to learn how to use the word language game. So and this is really important because it's not going outside language in any case. So he's saying, okay, any word is defined by its function in a language game, but language game is a word, so it's defined by its own function. And to find out this function, what I'm doing, so what Wittgenstein is doing, is to provide examples of the use of this term language game. So the point is that this is how we play the game. So I mean the language game with the word game. So something which is really important, I think, is this reference to Ramsey. In the introduction to philosophical investigations, Wittgenstein really says that it was because of Ramsey that he changed his mind with respect to his initial position. So in the Tractatus Logicus Philosophicus, I think, he had a different attitude. It was really connected to logic in a strict sense. And in philosophical investigations, is kind of dropping this idea of an ideal language, like the language of logic, as the reference to decide of a truth value of sentences, of propositions. And this change in the perspective is due to his relation with Ramsey. So Ramsey is the person who invited Wittgenstein in Cambridge. And he was his first supervisor for the dissertation, for the PhD. Then Ramsey died when he was 27 or 26, I don't remember. So and he died before publishing important things. But it was really important for Wittgenstein. So I just put this reference to Ramsey here, because I think that it has been overlooked, this relation between Ramsey and Wittgenstein. And for Ramsey, what was important was a critique of the possibility of establishing an ideal language like logic, a system of logic, in order to judge the true value of propositions. So here for Wittgenstein, we can judge the true value of proposition with respect to the context of a language game in which they are embedded. So there is no an ideal language which can provide the norm for judging any proposition. So this idea that the function of a word depends on the language game is coming in some way from Ramsey. And Ramsey is also important because of this, sorry. It's important because he is one of the person who contributed to both theory of probability, but also to the renewal of the inductive method. So the idea for Ramsey is that induction is a matter of producing regularities of action. And we will see that in Wittgenstein, what is important is regularities in use of words, regularities in the use of the terms. And this regularity in the use of the terms is in some way correlated to inductive regularities. So the idea that there are regular expectations or regular hypotheses. So, okay. Our investigation is directed not toward phenomena, but as one might say, toward the possibilities of phenomena. So this is important because also Saussure will say the same thing, but from a totally different perspective. So the idea is that the regularities in the use of the terms are what provides the regularities of phenomena. There are no regular phenomena, and then we describe them. But we can describe phenomena because we have a regularity of language. Okay, so the goal is to eliminate misunderstanding concerning the use of words. So to clarify the use of the terms, but without the idea of find an ideal language, but just to understand the different use of the terms with respect to different language game. So we are talking about the spatial and temporal phenomenon of language, not about some non-spatial, non-temporal phantasm. So this is a critique of an ideal logic, which is a language that nobody really speaks. So language games are really this spatial and temporal phenomenon of language. So to understand the use of the terms, one has to analyze the spatial and temporal phenomenon of language. And but we talk about it as we do about the pieces in chess, when we are setting the rules of a game. So not describing by physical properties. And this is really important because in order to describe this spatial and temporal phenomenon on language, we have to talk about them as we do when we describe a game. So the function of the pieces, but we are not describing the physical properties of the pieces. And we will see that for Saussure is the opposite, because for him, we are describing the physical properties of the pieces. So I put this quote just because it's important for the difference. So according to Wittgenstein, we have to explain the function of a pieces in a game with respect to the rules. So the rules are stating how to move, how we can move any piece, which is a term in the game, but not describing the physical properties. Because for Wittgenstein, a word is a piece in chess, but it's just the function of a piece in the game of chess. And we will see that for Saussure, it's not really the case. So just keep this in mind for later. Okay, so here he's explaining the meaning of language games. So language games are set up as objects of comparison, which are meant to throw light on the fact that our language, by way not only of similarities, but also dissimilarities. So it's a way of saying there is a plurality of language games, and they are similar because there is this family resemblance, but they are also different because the use of a term within a language game is different from the use of the same term in another language game. So the notion of true and false are then connected to the specificity of any language game. So a move in a game, so the way of using a piece, of making a move by moving a piece, using a piece in a game can be true or false, and this depends on the game. But this does not mean that there is some general way of making a distinction between what is true and what is false. So it depends on the game. But it's also noticing that there are, so the example is the king in chess is the piece that one can check. So this is true within a game where we can check only the king. So the fact that the king in the chess is the piece one can check is true depends on the fact that the game that we are playing is a game in which only the king can be checked. But we can also imagine another game where we can check the pawns rather than the king. So the sentence could be false. So the king in chess if one can check is false in a game where we can check the pawns. But Wittgenstein says this game is not is a game which is uninteresting, stupid, or too complicated, or something of the kind. This means that there is no a total freedom with respect to the game we are playing. So if we agree on playing some game rather than other games, that's not because it happens, but there is a meaning behind, or there is a reason behind, and this reason is connected to the forms of life, meaning that it's related to our habits and the regularity in hypothesis, or in way of interacting with each other. So there is a total freedom in choosing a game, but if a game is really a game which is regularly played, that means that is interesting, and it pays in some way. So there is a sort of selection of the games that we play, which is related to the forms of life, and forms of life are related to inductive regularities. So to the hypothesis that we make. So, for example, there is if we all believe that the planet, the Earth, is a sphere, we have some behavior which depends on this belief. So if we believe that the Earth is a sphere, we travel in some way rather than another one, and our way of using the word depends on these beliefs, depends on the inference that we make with respect to this belief. We could play another kind of game, so a game in which which is based on the belief, for example, that the Earth is flat. So we have to modify the function of the words, but it's not a game which pays, because we cannot do the same thing. So we will have another form of life, because our habits, our behavior, our practices would be different. So there is a selection of the language game which depends on the hypothesis about reality, and this hypothesis entails regularity of behaviors, and these regularities of behavior are justified because they allow for good practices, so for practices which can allow to get to maximize the utility, we could say, in the game theory vocabulary. So then we have a problem of the rules. So the problem of the rules is if the rules precede the games, or not. Because if the rules precede the games, we should ask what is the origin of the rule, and this is a kind of metaphysical question. So the idea is, okay, there is a signpost, and when there is a signpost, I behave in some way. So I'm trying to react to this sign in a particular way, and so I react to it. But this is only a causal connection. A person goes by a signpost only insofar as there exists a regular use of signpost, a custom. So the idea is that there is a regularity of practice, and the rule depends on this regularity of action, and regularity of action depends on inductive habits. So it's because there is this regularity which characterizes a form of life, that we perceive the rules. So the rules are not preceding the game, but the rules are something which emerge because we can notice that we are following regular behaviors. So there is first forms of life, and then because there is a form of life which is can be understood as a form of life, we can extract from it regularities and then acknowledge them as rules. So there are no rules, but it's not possible, but should have been only one occasion on which someone obeyed a rule. So this means that a rule is a custom. So to understand a sentence means to understand a language, which means that we understand the regularities in the use. And to understand a language means to be master of a technique. And to be master of a technique means that we know all the regularities in action. So here to speak a language is to master a technique, but it's a way of it's a practice. It's to be able to make some moves when it's the case to make some moves. So following a rule is analogous to obeying an order, and we are trained to do so. So we react to an order in a particular way. The idea is that we can, so it's not that we have this kind of rules which are a priori, but the common behavior of mankind is the system of reference by means of which we interpret an unknown language. So there is a connection between practices and language. So there are ways in which we react to the signs which are transmitted from the others. Sorry, I got a temperature, so you have to excuse me. I'm trying to do my best. I will be better next time. So there is this connection between the behavior of mankind and the system of reference. So there is this regularity of actions, and this regularity of action, of practices, are reflected in the regularities of language. So if we go in a foreign country with foreign people, we do not understand the language, we can understand that their behavior is kind of regular. So they are responding each other in behavior, and that the language which is accompanying this kind of behavior has its meaning, which is related to this form of life, or with respect to these regular practices. So but still these sounds are not superfluous, for if we get one of the people, it has the same consequences as with us. Without the sound, the action fall into confusion, as I feel like putting it. So even though I do not understand the language, one can see that this language is related to actions, to practices, and that it's some way of a tool for coordinating practices and actions. So it's kind of defining ordinal rule by means of regularity. So the idea is that there is no rule or order of the game which is a priori and it's cause regularities, but first there are regularities in actions and interactions, and the rules are basically this way on transmitting, of preserving regularities which are useful in some way. So one can justify the rules until the point the last justification is this is simply what I do. So this is the regularity which characterize my form of life. So the form agreement and the word rule are related to one another. So if I teach anyone the use of one word, it learns the use of the other with it. The word agreement and the word rule are related to one another because, of course, in order to have regularities of behavior, one has to have a community who is following the same regularities. So there is an agreement about the regularities, and these regularities are rules. And of course, there is a set of rules which defines different functions, so different ways of behave, different practices or moves which are allowed. So one cannot just learn one function, but one has to learn all the functions all together in order to play the game. So we will see that for Saussure is kind of the same here, meaning that there is this way of conceiving language as a system, and the meaning of one word is related to the meaning of all the other words. So it's not possible to explain or to get the function of one word without getting the function of all the word within the game, even though yes, for Saussure the reason is quite different. So you are saying that human agreement decides what is true and what is false. It is what human beings say that is true and false, and they agree in the language they use. But it's not agreement in opinion, but in form of life. So we are going back to the same concept of before. So there is an agreement which decides what is true or what is false. So what is a good move, a valid move, and what is not a valid move. And there is an agreement, but this agreement depends on a common form of life. So it depends on the common practices. So the idea that we are sharing a certain number of hypotheses which allows for coordinating actions. So to go back to the hypothesis of the form of the shape of the Earth, if we all believe that the Earth is a sphere, we behave in some way and not in another one, and this is a kind of agreement, but it's not an agreement in opinion, but in form of life, because we all behave, we all are engaged in some way of moving, in this case, or traveling. So it's related to practices, and practices are related to inductive hypotheses. So if language has to be a means of communication, there must be an agreement not only in definition, but also in judgments. Okay, this seems to abolish logic, because logic is based on universal definitions. So everything else is implied or entailed by the definitions. Here the idea is that we can choose in some way the hypotheses that are coordinating behavior, in the same way as we can choose the unit for measuring. And the definition depends on the constancy in the result of measurement. So the result of measurements are judgments. So would it be correct to say that it's a matter of induction? So here it's explicit, the idea that regularities of actions of a constitution of form of life depends of induction. So about expectations or predictive hypotheses. So it makes this example of the book. So the idea that if I drop the book, it falls to the ground. It's a matter of induction. Of course, if I believe that the book will fall, if I drop it, it entails a way of interacting with the book, and it entails a behavior. And what is important is that what could justify the certainty better than success, because this reveals the pragmatic aspects of form of life and language. So the regularity in practices are justified by success. So that means that the belief in an hypothesis is justified by the success. So the idea that The expectation, for example, that the book will fall to the ground it works, meaning that it allows me to make good decisions. And this is the best justification. So rather than looking for metaphysical reasons for belief, success is a good way for justifying certainty or belief. So it's what is important, I think, it's to see that all this idea of language games is related to theory of inductive reason. So the selection of regularity is a selection of practices which depends on inductive hypothesis. So it's a selection of inductive hypotheses which allows to make good decisions. So, for example, the certainty that the fire will burn me is based on induction, because I made the experience before. So one expects that the fire will burn me again. Of course, this belief entails practices. It also entails the function of the word, of the term fire, the way in which I can use it in language. So the idea is not that there is a final reason to believe that the fire will burn me forever, so next time, because it's an inductive hypothesis. But there is this sort of regularity, and this regularity is something which is useful, pragmatically useful. And this is the fact that there is a regularity in this hypothesis that makes it a sort of rule. So there is a connection with the form of life, and the confidence is not justified by reasons which are exterior or kind of metaphysical reasons, or why the fire has to burn me, but the confidence is justified by the regularity in practice. So the idea that everybody agrees that the hypothesis is a good one to avoid unwanted consequences. All this way of thinking of induction depends on Ramsey, Ramsey's way of conceiving induction. So the idea that we will never get inductive certainty because it's not possible to prove that what happened 100 times will happen in the same way also in the future. So it's not possible. The only condition would be to have observed all the possible occurrences, so infinite occurrences of the same phenomenon. But usually we rely on regularity, on regularities in practice, and these regularities are the hypotheses which are shared by a community. So the confidence is justified by the fact that there are common beliefs, and these common beliefs in some way organize common practices, and they allow for coordination. So we know that in front of a fire, everybody will react in the same way because everybody believes in the same hypothesis. So what does man think for? What use is it? So we are not interested in causes. But we think because in some way it pays. So there is this example of a boiler. So there is a sort of calculation to produce a boiler which does not explode. And there is a sort of regularity in the practice of building it. And we rely on this on this practice. This does not mean that the boiler will not explode if it has been constructed according to the rule, but it just means that we can rely, we can be confident. So we think because it pays, and we select the good practices which are products of thinking, because these practices allow to get what we want, so allow to get some goals. So it's advantageous to think, and it's advantageous to think because it allows to satisfy some necessities or some desires. And we select the practices to be used regularly. And once we select them, they became some sort of rules, but we all follow regularly. So there is a sort of selection of the practices that a community regularly use. So we do sometimes think because it has been found to pay. So the character of a belief in the uniformity of nature can perhaps be seen most clearly in the case in which we fear what we expect. The belief that the fire will burn me is of the same kind as the fear that it will burn me. Okay, so it's again to explain that there are these regularity in hypotheses, which entails regularity in actions, which entails regularity in the use of the linguistic terms. And the ground for the assumption is usually, so the ground for the assumption is the regularity itself. So if everybody believes in something and it has believing in something for a long time, it's probably true because it allowed for successful decisions. So it's a good ground because it makes the occurrence really probable. So it allows for predicting events in such a way to behave consequently. Then we have this problem of inference, and the problem of inference is connected to the problem of inductive hypothesis. So I draw the consequences not only in words, but also in action. So there is all the problem of sound sense data. It's always been the same kind of problem. So the problem is that we cannot use sense impressions as premises, because sense impressions are always what we describe as sense impressions. So we have to understand the function of a description of sense impression in the language game. An inference depends on passing from a description of a sense impression to a consequence. So the behavior, an inference is to assert something. So I see a chair and I say there is a chair, and I draw the consequences from what I can call sense impressions. But the idea is that I think it's later. Because he says, I don't know what it is, but for example, about the assertion of there is a chair here, he says, okay, the assertion is valid because then I behave like a chair was there. I mean, I sit on the chair because I believe in the hypothesis that that there is a chair. So this is the reason why I draw consequences not only in words but also in action. So without language, we could not communicate with one another, but for sure, without language, we cannot influence other people in such and such ways. We cannot build roads and machines. And also without the use of speech and writing, people could not communicate. So the idea is that, okay, we use language for communicating, but language is a way for coordinating behavior. And we can coordinate behavior because there is this sharing of beliefs and this sharing of hypotheses. So the idea is that if I say there is a chair here, I know that the other people will believe that the chair is there and they will behave as if the chair was there. Meaning that it will sit or doing other things with the chair. So it can influence behavior because any object has not only a function in language, but the function is language is related to regularities in behavior. So this will be more evident in David Lewis, but we will see next week. So it makes all this thing of coordination games more explicit. So here is going back to the same problem of the rules. So if the rules are a priori or not. And there are rules who have a purpose and rules which do not have a purpose. So there are rules which are essential and rules which are not essential. So language is an instrument and concepts are instruments. So it's an instrument that allows for sharing knowledge in some way and coordinating behaviors. So it's useful to predict maybe behavior. So to influence behavior means to be able to predict each other behaviors, meaning that if one says something, is kind of predicting the reaction of the other person, and this prediction of the reaction is what allows for coordination. Okay, this is the example I was looking for. When I sat down on this chair, of course, I believed it would burn me. He had no photos possible collapsing. So this is to show that there is a connection between the concept of a chair, the function of a chair, and the behavior which is connected with the object. Then there is an example of a game of guessing thoughts, and Wittgenstein says that we can actually guess thoughts of the others. This is within a discussion about private thoughts, like, okay, I am the only person who knows my own thoughts because they are my own thoughts. And Wittgenstein is kind of saying it's not true. Thoughts are not right, like private experiences, because we can guess the thoughts of the others. And he makes this example of there is a person who is putting together a jigsaw puzzle, and actually I can guess the thoughts of the person who is doing this jigsaw puzzle. So probably the person is saying, now where is this beat? Now I know how it fits, by observing the behavior of the other person. And this is possible because we are sharing a form of life, we are sharing common hypotheses, and because we are sharing practices. So it's possible to imagine a guessing of intentions, like the guessing of thoughts, but also guessing of what someone is actually going to do. And this is possible because we share this hypothesis, and language is embedded in these regularities, which allows to predict the behavior of the others, and also to occasion the behavior of the others. It's to contest this myth of a private intention. So I am the only one who knows my own intentions. And for Wittgenstein, okay, I know my intentions, but these intentions depends on the description of a form of life. It depends on other regularities, for example, regularities in hypotheses and practices. So one can predict the actions of the others, one can predict the thoughts of the others. And language is a way of, it's based on these regularities, and it's a means for predicting and to produce predictable responses or reactions. So the idea is that concepts are related to functions. So concepts are related to these regular practices. And of course, these regular practices depends in some way on the environment, on nature. So probably if nature was different, we would have different concepts. But there is no a natural necessity for the formation of concepts. So it's not, we are not doing natural science, not natural history. So the idea is not to explain how concepts emerge naturally, since we can also invent fictitious natural history for our purposes. So the idea is that we have purposes and we create concepts which are functional to fulfill our purposes or our desires within nature, of course. So we could also have different concepts, but of course, if we had different concepts, we would behave in a different way. So concepts as functions are related to a regularity of practices, regularity of actions. So we can imagine that we have different concepts, and with different concepts we behave or we interact in a totally different way. This means that there is no natural necessity for the concepts that we have, but this means that in order to fulfill specific goals, we create the concept which allows for getting these goals in the environment in which we are. So we're not representing the environment as it is, but we are finding regularities which allows for obtaining the desired goals within the environment in which we are. So I know it was a bit confused because I'm a bit sick, so I'm kind of slow. But before going further, you have questions? Because I think that maybe you are familiar with Wittgenstein. So the main message of this part was just to see that for Wittgenstein, language is a game, in the sense that words are like pieces, the chessmen in a game of chess, and we have to move them, and we can move them according to some rule in some strategic way. So we are intelligent players, and we have these pieces, and we move the pieces with respect to the goals of the game. Okay, so if you are okay here, I just introduce briefly John Newman and Oscar Morgenstern, theory of games and economic behavior. So they are the first to introduce game theory, so mathematical game theory, and to relate game theory to rational behavior. They make this in the context of economics, since the problem in economics is to predict the other agent's behavior. So economy is working, so in the market there are it's a way of exchanging and to make decisions, the success of which depends on the decisions of all the others. So if I decide to sell something, to set a price to sell something, I have to predict that people will buy this thing at this price. So decisions depends on the prediction of the decisions of the others. So in this way, it's possible to coordinate. So the idea is that if all the agents are rational, it's possible for any agent to predict the behavior of the others. So anybody can expect some response from the other because they know that they are rational. In this way, if anybody is rational, anybody has the possibility of making the best possible decision. So to formalize these ideas, they create this game theory. And so there are two important notions in game theory, which is the notion of utility and the notion of equilibrium. So utility is what one wants to get. So it's depends on preferences, but it's what one wants to get. So they are assuming that all the agents are just wanting money, just to make this homogeneous. And they try to get to maximize the utility, means that they want as much as possible. So the idea is that if anybody acts rationally, anybody can maximize the utility, meaning that anybody can make the best decision with respect to the decisions of the others. So it would, if anybody actually follow the rules of rationality, they can all get as much as possible. So if I deviate from the rational behavior, for sure they will get less. So if anybody act rationally, anybody gets, like, for example, 10. If one doesn't act rationally, it will get less, for example, 5, and the others will get more. So the idea is that the equilibrium is this situation in which anybody makes the best possible decision. So they coordinate in such a way that anybody is satisfied in the same way. So it in some way is the same thing of language for Wittgenstein, because we have these regularities in action, in practices, or in the use of a term, and these regularities are maintained because they are useful. They allows for reaching some goals, to coordinate, and the deviation from the rules entails that one cannot get what he wants. Meaning that, for example, if I don't use language correctly, the other person won't understand me. I wouldn't obtain the result that I expect. And the same thing is for inductive hypotheses. So inductive hypotheses are anticipations of a future, and these anticipations are useful because allows me to make decisions. The selection of hypotheses allows to make these kind of predictions, and they are useful. So we can say that the belief in the rational belief, it's the belief in hypotheses which work. So in game theory, it's kind of the same thing, but we have to predict the decisions of the other. So in language, of course, we can predict the behavior of the other. So for example, if I say the word, if I say there is a fire, I know that the other will escape because they are rational. So they know what the word fire means. So in game theory, well, it's not really connected to the meaning of the words, but it's connected in the same way to rational behavior, meaning that being rational, we select actions or decisions which depends on the anticipation of the decisions of the others. And this means that we share some hypotheses which allows for predicting the inferences of the other. So given a situation, we can say, okay, we describe a situation and we know that there is a limited number of rational decisions that are entailed by the description of this situation. So the immediate concept of a solution is a set of rules for each participant which tell him how to behave in every situation which might conceivably arise. So the solution is the equilibrium. So the solution of a game, which is a problem, is the selection of rules, and these are the rules which tell to any agent how to react to different possible situations. So there are rules of rational behavior, and usually the rational rules are the rules which allows to get, which allows everybody to get the maximum, the optimal, or to maximize the utility in such a way that to deviate from the rules means to lose, or to lose something, so to get less. Then, of course, there are agents who can deviate. The idea is to be able to predict also the possible deviation, so irrational behavior. In any case, really the idea is to find a description of games in which we can get this solution, and the solution is really to find the rules which allows for maximizing the utility in such a way that to not follow the rules, so to act against the rules means for sure to get less than we can get by following the rules. So we follow the rational rules, not because they are abstractly rational, but they are rational because they allow everybody to obtain the best possible result. So there is a distinction okay, so there is abstract concept of a game, individual plays of a game. The game is the totality of the rules which describe it. So we have a game like a game of chess in general, and then we have different games of chess, of course, and they are all different. There is a distinction. So there are the moves of the game, and a move is the occasion of a choice between various alternatives to be made either by one of the player or by some device, or for example, a dice. So a move is a choice between various alternatives. If we transpose this in language game, that means that when we have a term or a word, and we have to make a move, this means that we can use the word in different ways. So we can make different moves with the same word. So we can use it to create different sentences, for example, or different statements. So a move is to create a linguistic action. So we move is this occasion. So to play a game means to make these choices, how to use, so the move we decide to make in language. So the game consists in sequences of moves, and they play in sequences of choices. So if you have, there is this diagram which is like a tree with all the possible, for example, in a game of chess, starting from the same situation, we have then a tree because one make a move, and then other possible situations are possible given this move. And maybe I have an image of this. Like this is an image of a game of chess. So we have a first situation, and then depending on the move, we have different branches which open. So the play of a game is, it varies, depends on the choices of the agents, but there is a limited number of options in any case. So the rules of the games are absolute commands, but even though there are these rules of the game, any time the game is played is different, and the total unfolding of the game is not given in advance because moves are related to choices. So the game consists of a sequence of move and play of sequence of choices. Then we have the rules, and we have the strategies of the players. So the strategies are sequences of moves, and they are choose freely. So there are good strategies and bad strategies depending on the result. And any player can choose his own strategy. But any strategy must respect the rules of the game. So I think that there is a similarity between the conception of language games in Wittgenstein and the conception of games in von Neumann and Morgenstern, which is the beginning of game theory. And I think that it enlightens also the idea that there is an a priori behind, which is a theory of rational behavior, meaning that the regularities, which means the moves, depends on the fact that they allow for practical ends. So there is some utility that must be maximized, and following the rules, one can actually maximize the utility. So in Wittgenstein, language is related to forms of life, but forms of life are related to knowledge. So there is a selection of regular practices which depends on progress in knowledge. So to select the hypotheses which deserve to be common knowledge, or to be shared by everybody. So it's kinds of beliefs which are pragmatically useful. And what is important is that players here are rational. So but players are rational means that they decide what to do, and they choose their own strategy, and they are active in some way. So they act in order to get something specific, and they are able to predict the behavior of the others, and to manipulate in some way the behavior of the others, meaning that they know that by doing something they will get some specific response. So there is a way of using language as a tool to get something. In the same way as in game theory, the moves are meant to solve the game, so to maximize the utility. So it's inscribed in a practice which is meant to fulfill needs or desire or goals. And there is of course, a selection of the best possible hypotheses or regularities of action, which is historical. So one can abandon a language game for another one, or one can find a better solution for a game. So there is the rules of the games depends in some way on this inquiry, on this inquiry, scientific inquiry or not scientific, it doesn't matter, but it's related to a standard of inductive reasoning or inductive rationality. And things are completely different in structuralism. So there is, so I think, but what was important in Wittgenstein from the point of view of the game is that it's a sort of competition in some way, meaning that agents are using language to do something. And so words are like the chessmen in a game of chess, and these pieces are moved by agents who are using them correctly because they are rational. In structuralism is totally different. So in structuralism, as we are going to say, we are going to see, we are not using, so there are no agents using languages to make moves. It's kind of the opposite. So it's language which is moving moving people or moving agents. So to explain this, we have to start from the beginning. So we have to enter Saussure conception of language. So we don't have a lot of time. Saussure conception of language is totally different. So you have, I think, to forget what we said until now in order to enter this other way of seeing language. So at the beginning, Saussure makes this difference between language and speech. Langue et parole. So he says that language must be distinguished from human speech, which is totally is different from Wittgenstein. So from Wittgenstein, we have to consider language games like real use of language in linguistic communities. So what people do, regularity in the use of the word, and is really starting his analysis from regularities in the use of language, so in different language games. For Saussure, we do not have to consider human speech. So we don't have to consider what people are saying, but the object of the inquiry is to extract what language is independently from what people are saying. So it says, okay, there is a language, like, for example, English or French, and this language does not correspond to any real instantiation. So when I use English or French, I'm modifying it a little bit. So any instantiation, any act of speech is not the language, but it's a sort of example of a language. So it's trying to see what is language in itself, independently of the acts of speech. So this is already really different. So speech is many-sided and heterogeneous because, for example, we pronounce words in different ways, even though we mean the same word, we pronounce it in different ways. So he says, okay, we don't have to consider speech, but we have to consider language. And in language, there is only one pronunciation, which is the sonorous image of a word. So his idea is to consider language as a whole, independently on the acts of speech. So language is an object in the heterogeneous mass of speech facts. So Wittgenstein was only considering speech facts. For Saussure, what the goal is to find language beyond the speech facts. So for Wittgenstein, to understand how we act in language, so how we make these speech facts, the regularities. For Saussure, the idea is to find the structure of a language, so English or French or Chinese. Language, like speaking, is something we can study separately. So he thinks that language can be studied independently of speaking. So he says we can learn language which are no longer spoken. That means for him that we can identify a language independently on the speech. So speech is heterogeneous, language as defined is homogeneous. Is a system of signs. And the only essential thing is the union of meaning and sound images. We will go back to this later. Language is concrete, no less so than speaking. So the pronunciation of even the smallest word represents an infinite number of muscular movements that could be identified and put into graphic form with difficulty. So this is for speech. So in speech, we have so many differences that we don't have in language, because in a language, there is only the sound image. And the letter can be translated into fixed visual image. So a sound image is not the same thing as the pronouns. It's the sound ideal image of a word in a language. So language is comparable to a symphony in that what the symphony actually is stands completely apart from how it is performed. So the mistakes the musicians make in playing the symphony do not compromise this fact. So okay, language is like a symphony. It's to say, okay, language is the script of a piece of music, and which is beyond the different performances. So we don't have to look for the performances in order to understand what language is, but we have to look to the script in some way. So it's a different attitude with respect to Wittgenstein. So my definition of language presupposes the exclusion of everything that is outside its organism or system, in a word, of everything known as extra linguistics. Whether for Wittgenstein, Wittgenstein was interested in external linguistic facts from Saussure standpoint, meaning that Wittgenstein is really interested in how people use language, the function that language has in communities. For Saussure, this doesn't matter at all. This is an extra linguistic matter, and they just want to know what a language is, what defines a language. So he's talking about internal linguistics. So language is a system that has its own arrangement, and comparison with chess will bring out the point. So this is comparison with chess. And here the comparison is made in order to show the difference between extra-linguistic and internal linguistic factors. So in chess, what is external can be separated relatively easily from what is internal. So for example, the fact that the game passed from Persia to Europe is external. Against that, everything having to do with its system and rules is internal. If I use ivory chessmen instead of wooden ones, the change has no effect on the system. But if I increase or decrease or increase the number of chessmen, this change has a profound effect on the grammar of the game. So one must always distinguish between what is internal and what is external. So the history of a language is external, but there is a structure, so the rules of a game, which is internal. In each instance, one can determine the nature of a phenomenon by applying this rule. Everything that changes the system in a way is internal. So, for example, according to Saussure, language is like a game of chess, meaning that there is a set of pieces and a set of rules, and this is internal. And how do we play? It's external. So it's not how do we play that is interesting, but it's the fact that there is a certain number of elements and rules. And he wants to define the games independently on how we play. So it defines then the linguistic sign, which is his more important definition. So the linguistic sign unites not a thing and a name. So here is agreeing with Wittgenstein. So language is not a way of putting together an object, a real object, and a name. This was the example at the beginning of philosophical investigation with Augustine, with said that he learned language because they told him what they pointed at the object of the bearer of the name. So yeah, they agree. So language is not a matter of connecting a real object and a name. And for Saussure, a linguistic sign, it's a way of putting together a concept and a sound image. And this is really interesting because for Wittgenstein, words were really connected directly to concepts, so to functions, like tools to do things, where concepts are important because they allow us to pass to other concepts, so to move from a concept to another one. For Saussure, a linguistic sign unites a concept and a sound image. Sound image really means a sound, the sound of a word. And we saw that in Wittgenstein, this idea of a sound, it's not considered at all. So in Wittgenstein, the sonic dimension of language is not considered, so it's not important. It doesn't matter how a word sounds, the sound of a word. For Saussure, the sound is really important. So it's a connection between a concept and a sound image. The latter is not the material sound, so it's not the pronunciation how and a person pronounce it, because it varies with a person, so any person pronounces it in a different way. But it's a purely physical film, but it's the psychological imprint of the sound, the impression that it makes on our senses. So the fact what allows for recognizing a sound, so the sign of a word, the sound of a word, that a word is a certain word, even though it is pronounced in different ways. So this sound impression is what allows us to recognize a word as a sound, even though it is always pronounced in different ways. So the sound image is sensory, and it can be called material with respect to the other part, which is the concept, which is not material. So linguistic science, you have the image here, so it's the relation of a concept and a sound image. So a linguistic sign, like a word, the word tree, is the connections of tree is a sign which connects the sound tree and the concept of tree. So I call the combination of a concept and a sound a sign. And I propose to retain, so the sound is the signifier, and the concept is the signifies, signifier, signifiant. So at any linguistic unit, so any word is this union of a sound and a concept. So the bond between the signifier and the signified is arbitrary. So the linguistic sign is arbitrary, so there is no reason to connect a certain sound with a certain concept. We can use whatever sound for whatever concept. So it's arbitrary, even though they are fixed, but there is no reason why a certain sound stands for a certain concept. A language constitutes a system. And the system is a complex mechanism that can be grasped only through reflection. So we will see later what system means. Another important distinction in Saussure is the difference between diachronic and synchronic dimension. According to Saussure, there is language and there is the community of speakers. So language is a system in itself, and then there is the way in which it is used by the community of speakers. So they just use the language, but they cannot modify the language. Language is not a convention that can be modified of the interest parties. Language cannot be modified by the speakers. So the speaker, of course, can anybody can speak in a different way. So any act of speech is a sort of expression of language, which is different. But these different ways of using language in some way, of this actualization in real speech, do not modify language in itself. So for example, English is English independently on how people speak English. On the opposite, we have a history of language. So the evolution of language in time. So we have, for example, old English and modern English, which is different. So there is an historical evolution of language in itself. But for Saussure, these are two different axes. So there is an axis of simultaneities and an axis of successions. So the axis of simultaneities is synchronic. That means that we consider language as it is. So, for example, contemporary English, and we do not consider the history of it, or we can just consider the historical transformations. But for him, these are two different kinds of analysis. And for him, the most important is the synchronic analysis. So we take a language as a fixed system without considering its historical evolution to understand the structure of this language. So he makes this example. So a language is like a solid, geometrical solid, and a state of a language, so a synchronic state, is just a projection of this object. So we have the object and then we have a projection. So a synchronic state or particular state is a projection of this language. And then he's introduced again this comparison with a game of chess in order to explain this distinction between synchronicity and diachronicity. So a game of chess is like an artificial realization of what language offers in natural form. A state of a set of chessmen corresponds closely to a state of language. The state of a set of chessmen, it means that we have a game, we have to consider a specific situation. The distributions of a chessman on a chessboard in a specific moment, this is a state of language. So the respective values of the pieces depends on their position of the chessboard, just as each linguistic term derives its value from its opposition to all the other terms. In second place, the system is always momentary. It varies from one position to the next. It's also true that values depends above all else on unchangeable convention, a set of rules that exist before a game begins and persist after each moves. Rules that are agreed upon once and for all exist in all language too. So they are constant principles of semiology. So the idea is that a synchronic state of, so what is studying is not how we use chessmen to play a game of chess, but is consider the disposition of a chessman at a specific moment, like a synchronic state of language. So it's not interested in how we move the chessmen, but how they are at a specific moment. So the value that any piece has with respect to the other when the game is frozen. So it's like to freeze the game at a certain state and to decide that different words of signs as a value at that moment of a game. And this is the synchronic axis. Then we have the diachronic axis, and the diachronic axis of the change, the historical changes of a language is the game. This is the unfolding of the game. So the unfolding of the game, so the different position of a chessman on the chessboard are the historical transformations of a language. But this analysis, structural analysis, it's in synchronicity, so it's interested in just one disposition, so just a state of a set. So it's not how we move the pieces. This is not interesting for him, because nobody move the pieces is actually historical transformations. Is interesting in the values of the pieces, one with respect to the other, at a specific state of a game, so like it was freezing the game at a point, and to see the different values, the respective values of the pieces at a specific time. So in each play, only one chess piece is moved. In the same way, in language, change affect only isolate elements. So this means that this is the historical change. So in each play, only one chess piece is moved. In the same way, in language, changes affect only isolated elements. It's an historical change. So we have historical changes in languages. So isolated elements are modified. But this doesn't mean that we are really playing the game. It means that there are historical forces which are modifying the game according to some rules, which are the structural rules, as we will see. The move has no repercussion on the whole system. So the historical transformation of a language has no repercussion of a language in itself. So it's the same language, even though it is historically transformed. It is impossible for the player to foresee the effects of this kind of historical changes are not predictable for the players because they're not playing the game. And there are different kind of historical changes, and these historical changes are actually moves in the game. So the moves in the game for Saussure are not use of the words, but moves in the game are historical changes in the game. In chess, each move is absolutely distinct from the preceding and the subsequent equilibrium. Only states matter. So for Saussure, what is important is the difference, the passage from one state to another one, which is historical. And in fact, any state of a game is independent from all the antecedent positions. So in fact, to enter a game of chess, we don't need to know all the history of a game. So we can just enter a game of chess given a situation. So for example, when we have in newspapers, we find this problem of chess, and we start from a specific situation, we not start a match from the beginning, but we have a specific situation, and from Saussure this is the independence from the antecedent position. So it doesn't matter how we do arrive to a certain state, but we can enter a game of chess in a specific situation, a specific state. So for him, the synchronicity of specific state or language is independent from its history, can be analyzed independently from the history that brought us to that specific situation. Speaking operates only language state. And so this is the most important thing. At only one point is this comparison weak, so the comparison between language and chess. The chess player intends to bring about a shift and thereby to exert an action on the system, whereas language premeditates nothing. The pieces of language are shifted or rather modified spontaneously and fortuitously. In order to make the game of chess seem at every point like the functioning of language, we would have to imagine an unconscious or unintelligent player. And so this is the main difference. So for Wittgenstein and for game theory, we need to be intelligent players. So it's supposed that we are using language as intelligent players. So we are playing a game of chess as intelligent players. For Saussure, we have to imagine unconscious and unintelligent players. So there is no intelligence, no rationality in the game. So the idea is not how we intelligent people or rational people do play chess in order to win, for example. But the idea is to describe the system as it is. So nobody's playing. There is the play of a structure, but the play of a structure is not the play of a subject. There's no subject playing in structuralism. And so we will find this idea of this absent subject in the play of a structure in all the continental philosopher. So we find it in Derrida, we find it in Deleuze, we find it in Foucault. We also have this kind of absent subject and a play of a structure. And this is the origin of this way of conceiving this. So there is a sort of blind force against the organization of a system of signs. And this system of signs, or this state of a game, so the disposition of the pieces of chess on the chessboard is unconscious. So it's the value of a different chessmen relative value of different pieces in a state of a game is something which is usually unconscious. So it makes the difference between language and other social institutions. So it says, okay, one may assume a priori that is governed by prescriptions analogous to those of that control communities, but it says that no, it's not the same. It's not the same as other social institutions. And for Wittgenstein is kind of the opposite, meaning that a language and social institution are kind of the same thing. So they are really connected. So language is connected to forms of life. For Saussure, there is a total independency between forms of life and language. Because we cannot change, we cannot modify language in the same way as we modify social institutions. So this is to see this is human speech. From human speech, there is a distinction between language and speaking, and it's just considering language and not speaking, and is considering synchrony rather than diachrony. Okay, so synchronic linguistic is concerned with logical and psychological relations that hint together coexisting terms and form a system in the collective mind of a speaker. Diachronic linguistic is historical modification. So here is going to recall the principles that dominate the whole issue. The linguistic entity exists only through the association of a signifier and with a signified. So it's we said the concept and the sound image. The linguistic entity is not accurately defined until it is delimited, separated from everything that surrounds it on the phonic chains. These delimited entities or units stand in opposition to each other in the mechanism of language. So this is important, and I didn't explain this before. So the linguistic entity is not defined until it is delimited. So it's starting or is analysis from phonetics. So the idea is to so since the sign is composed by sounds, the idea is to make a distinction among different sounds. So if language is like music, is like music, a continuum of music or sonorous continuum. The problem for him is to make a distinction between parts. So any sounds, might be distinguished from the others. So for him, phonemes are these kind of units which do not have any meaning. But for example, I make the distinction between P and T, not because there is a reason, but P and T as perceived differently, they are opposed as sounds, and they allowed to make distinctions in this sonorous continuum. So there is this phonic chain, and we need cut. It's in units, and these units are phonemes, and words are composition of phonemes, and these compositions respect some rules, but these rules are rules of oppositions. And it's connected with the different sounds, for example, in different languages. So we have sounds in some languages which are not distinguished from others. For example, in French, if I say on, I say on, it's totally different. So the sound on and the sound on, they can make the difference between two words, but in English there is no difference. So the idea is that there are specific units or phonema or sounds that are that can make the difference between two words. So this phonematic system is a system of opposition. So a sound has a signification with respect to the system of sounds which are marks in the system. So it's starting really from this analysis of sounds of the words. So this is why it's saying it is a confused mass. It is a confused mass because there is this continuum of sound, which is a confused mass, and only attentiveness and familiarization will reveal its particular elements. So the unit has no special phonic character, and the only definition that we can give is this: it is a slice of sound which the exclusion of everything that precedes and follow it in the spoken chain is the signifier of a certain concept. So, and any word is a slice of sound, and this slice of sound is the signifier, is connected to a certain concept. But all the problem is to make the distinction between a slice of sound and another slice of sound in the continuum. So the idea is that these slices of sound compose a system. And they compose a system because any slice is opposed or is difference, can be differentiated from another one. So the sound T is distinguished from the sound D, and the sound S from the sound V. So it's just as a game of chess. In the combination of the different chess pieces, language is characterized as a system based entirely on the opposition of its concrete units. So the concrete units are these phonemes, phonematic units, and they are like these phonemes, so these sound units are like the chessmen in a game of chess, meaning that any sound has a value which depends on its position in the system. We don't move them. It's not a game in which we are moving the pieces, but we know that the different elements have a meaning because they are opposed, they are valued because they are part of a specific situation of a system. So the different entities of a language are not directly accessible. so there is nothing necessary in the distinction. So we have basically this continuum of sounds, and the elements where there is no atoms which are given a priori, and this is here is agreeing with Wittgenstein in some way. There is no a basic unit in language. There are entities in a system. So any word in Wittgenstein, for example, the meaning of a word can be understood only within the system of language. Here, it's a kind of a saying. The meaning of a word can be understood only by knowing the whole system, but the image or the idea of a system is totally different. In Wittgenstein, it's a system of functions, meaning that any word can be used in some way, or is used in some way to do something. Here, on the contrary, they are different entities only because they have a different position, one with respect to the other. So it's a kind of frozen game. So he makes again the example of the chess deck a knight, for instance. By itself, it's an element in the game. So by itself, is it an element in the game? Certainly not. For by its material make up outside its, so it becomes a real concrete element only when endowed with value and wedded to it. And here it seems to agree with Wittgenstein in some way, meaning that a chessman can be understood, so the meaning of a word, like the function of a chessman, can be understood only within the game. So it becomes a real concrete element only when endowed with value and wedded to it, to the system. So the piece can be destroyed or lost during the game and can be replaced with an equivalent. So the notion of identity blends with the notion of value and vice versa. So the identity of a piece correspond to the value. And so I think that the idea is that for Wittgenstein, the identity of a word, which means specific chessman, it's the identity of a word. So a chessman depends on the function. Here, the identity is a matter of value and not of function. So there is a difference between value and function. So the notion of value envelops the notion of unit, concrete entity, and reality. And so this notion of value is a central question in all of static linguistic. So the notion of value is the role of the possibility of making the distinction between an entity and another one. And this distinction depends on a system of oppositions. So in a game of chess, the different chessmen in a frozen state. I think we are late. Am I late?
We passed 7 minutes.
Okay.
So,
I think I'm going to finish this. So try to be quick. So okay, this is the image to show that we have B is sound, like a continuum of sound, and A is the continuum of thought. So we have to make arbitrary distinction in order to create a linguistic sign between connecting sound and thought. And the most important part is this. So the idea is that we have a continuum of sound and a continuum of thought. So we have to make distinctions. So any chessman, for example, is a cat in the continuum of thought, which form a concept which corresponds to a sound. So any concept is a way of cutting the continuum of thought. So there is no concept that's not related to hypotheses or functions, practical functions, but there is just a continuum of thinking without distinctions. And we have to make distinction in what we think in this continuum. So we cut, and the cut corresponds to concepts, and concepts are coupled with sounds. So we said before, but there is a continuum of sounds, or sonorous continuum, which is cut in phonemes in sound. So the idea is to have these two lines of continuous, or continuum of thought and a continuum of sonorous images, and we cut them together. So any cut here in vertical is a linguistic sign, and they correspond to each other. So any concept is a cut in the continuum of thought, in the same way as any word is a cut in the continuum of sonorous expression. So concepts are not functions. Concepts are just defined because one concept is a cut in the continuum of thought, and it has its value because it finds itself between this concept and this concept. So this forms a structure where concepts has a value because there is a distinction between a concept and another one, but not because of the function of the concept. So we have the sign, a linguistic sign. We said there is a signified and a signifier. So a signified is a concept, a signifier is a sound, sonorous image. So they are related. So this is a sign, like a word, is the connection of a, and then any sign as a meaning or as a value because it is connected or related with another sign. So we have a system of language is a system where any sign which is composed by a signifier and a signified and a signifier is embedded in a system where it is opposed or differentiated with respect to another sign. So it says it's the same thing. The value is we have value in the sense that we can exchange something for something else. For example, we can exchange $1 for a piece of bread. So we can exchange a signifier for a signifier, so a sonorous image and a concept. So $1 the signifier, and a piece of bread the signified, and this is a sign. But then we have the value of the sign itself with respect to the value of other things, meaning that we can evaluate the value of $1 with respect to the value of €1. And so the system is in the two dimensions. So a sign can be compared with another sign, and a sign can be compared with another sign because there is a system. So any sign is a chessman in a state of a game of chess. So the knight is here, the tower is here, and the pawn is here. But their meaning or their value depends on that specific state. So the important thing is the word is not the sound alone, but the phonic differences that make it possible to distinguish this word from all the words, for differences carry signification. So that differences carry signification means that these signs has not signification in itself, but it has a value, it has a signification because it is opposed to another one and to another one. In the same way as if I say the sound A, for example, it has a meaning or it has a value because there is a system of phonemes, a system of sounds that we recognize as the phonemes of a language. So we could have choose whatever kind of sound in order to talk, in order to speak, but there is a limited number of sounds that we recognize as pertinent to communicate. So the idea for Saussure is that we choose this kind of sounds because they can be distinguished one with respect to the other, and the value of each of this sound is relative to its position in the system. So it's not that the sound T has a specific meaning, it doesn't mean nothing, but it has a value in the system of language because it can be distinguished from other sounds. And then it enlarge the system in the same way as phonemes or sounds as a value because they are opposed one with respect to another one. So the signs, which are words like aggregation of phonemes, as a value because they are opposed to others. So when we see in other structuralists like Derrida or Lacan, this chain of signifiers, this is a chain of signifiers. Or when because they are in some way connected, already connected one with respect to the other. Every language forms its words on the basis of a system of sonorous elements, each element being a clearly delimited unit and one of a fixed number of units. Phonemes are characterized not as one may think by their own positive quality, but simply by the fact that they are distinct. So phonemes are above all else opposing relative and negative entities. So phonemes do not exist in themselves, they only exist because they are opposed or distinguished one with respect to another one. So this is the reason why in language there are only differences. And even more important difference generally implies positive terms between which the difference is set up. But in language, there are only differences without positive terms. So all the insistence in continental philosophy and in structuralist philosophy with respect to philosophy of difference, so the idea that there are first difference differences and then identity. This is the reason, this is the idea. So all this continental contemporary philosophy, like linked to structuralism, is coming from this idea that in language there are only differences, and differences without positive terms. But positive terms depends on a system of differences. So language, neither ideas nor sounds existed before the linguistic system, but only conceptual phonic differences have issued from the system. So everything has a meaning within the system, but the elements are differences. So the elements subsist because elements are opposed, or they can be distinguished. So linguistic system is a series of differences of sound combined with a series of differences of ideas. And the pairing of a certain number of acoustical signs with as many cuts made from the mass of thoughts engender a system of values. So the system of values depends on this series of differences. Signified and signifier are purely differential and negative when considered separately. But their combination is a positive fact, meaning that we can communicate real things by putting together elements which are purely differentials. So the elements are arranged in sequences or chain on speaking, and then this thing is the same, meaning that any proposition has a meaning with respect to the other propositions. So it makes this comparison between syntaxes, which are propositions, where we put together units like fixed part of a building, like a column, which has a certain relation to the architrave. And so this is a syntagmatic relation, so we construct a building. And then there is another association, like if a column is Doric, it suggests a mental comparison of this style with others. So the value of any element depends on its inscription of a system of elements. And there are different kinds of associations that can be done. So in language, everything boils down to differences, but also to groupings. The mechanisms of language, which consist in the interplay of successive terms, assemble the operation of a machine in which the parts have a reciprocating function, even though they are arranged in a single dimension. The operation of a machine, so for example, when you have in Deleuze all this idea of the machinic unconscious is this. It means that so you have differences, meaning that the value of any element depends on its position on the system, but you also have this kind of chains or series. So for example, you have a sign. Here is enseignement, teaching, and you have different kind of groupings coming of associations. So here, for example, are all the verbs forms of teaching. Here you have words which are connected with teaching, for example, learning, education, or you have all the words which are like teaching, changing, doing, or then you have, well, it doesn't work in English. Anyway, when you have in structuralism or in continental philosophy, all this idea of this chain of signifiers, or in Deleuze, in logic of sense, most of all, you have a series, and you have, in these games of a series, you have connections, elements jumping from one series and another one, the missing center. So it's all about this kind of system of differences and opposition. So okay, so I stop here, and Levi Strauss, I will talk about it next time. Okay. So I don't know if you were familiar with Saussure, if it sounds really strange to you, but okay, so it's really late. I'm sorry. I will be better next time. I'm a bit sick today. So next week I think I programmed to go to analytic philosophy, like Lewis, Sellars, Brandon. I think I will talk before about Levi Strauss, and then I will talk about the analytic philosophy. Okay, I let you go. Thank you.
Thank you. Bye.
Thank you. Bye.
Thank you.
This was great. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Anna. See you next time.
Thank you. See you.